Welcome back to Happy Hour Econ, where a comedian and an economist walk into a bar. I'm Lou Perez, the comedian.
I'm Phil Magnus, the economist.
So here at Happy Hour Econ, we do not keep it 78 degrees indoors like government officials tell us to do. And I just checked mine, and it's at 69, which is both very comfortable and a very juvenile joke. Phil, what's your thermostat set to?
I currently have it at 68 degrees, which is great because it's about 97 outside.
Obviously, this is just an audio episode, but I am currently sitting in my home office with shorts on, a beanie, and a sweater, because that's how I like to. I like to keep my body guessing. I like to keep myself very confused. But I'm one of those people. I need my indoors to be cool,
Especially in the summer.
And I just saw a recent tweet go out from the mayor of New York asking New Yorkers to keep their thermostats at 78 degrees indoors because they're currently going through a heat wave, and they want to make sure that the grid is up to snuff.
It's the warmth of collectivism literally coming into your home in New York City from Zoran Mamdani.
The sweltering warmth of collectivism, to be exact. And here's the thing that I'm kind of confused at, because when it comes to like rolling blackouts and stuff like that, California goes through that every year. And in New York City, there's a fear that, you don't want to overload the grid. But these are the same people who think that the government can basically take care of every single need, but yet you have to be careful or you won't be able to turn the lights on.
Right. Well, it turns out that the states and regions of the world that have the greatest problems with these sorts of things, so California and New York, also tend to be the most heavily regulated electricity markets. They're the ones where the government invests in trying to actually artificially suppress electricity consumption because of climate change or all sorts of other environmental goals. And one of the things here is when you start to do that, you actually distort the signals that are being sent on the electricity market. Because, if there's a need for consuming electricity to run your air conditioner at a normal temperature in the 68 to 72 range, which is what most people find comfortable, that's a signal that, hey, electricity is desired to produce more of it, and we'll pay for it because it's on a market. And yet you have someone like Zoran Mamdani and other figures on the left saying, no, you should actually self-ration your electricity because we have this greater goal of serving the collective good. Again, the warmth of collectivism. We need to protect the planet and reduce climate change and not strain our grid that we've artificially suppressed from meeting actual signaled capacity of what people want and desire and reflect in their eating preferences.
Yeah, and when it comes to preferences, we prefer it comfortable, we prefer it cool, and I'm happy to pay for that.
Absolutely.
What are, some of the things getting in the way of the market doing what it does?
All comes down to policy decisions. And, we've had this big push, I'd say really over the past 20 to 25 years, that climate change is supposedly this existential crisis. And, of course, climate change is caused by CO2 emissions. CO2 emissions come from primarily from the generation of electricity, the generation of energy. And the idea here is that we can reduce CO2 emissions by making our electricity use much more efficient, by using the government to forcibly regulate people into consuming less electricity. And this takes all sorts of forms, from straight up banning and regulating pollutant-heavy power production, so coal, for example. They've made that much more expensive and even cost prohibitive to maintain, and the idea is to drive coal-producing power plants out of business, which they've largely succeeded in doing. Then there are also these little nudge efforts around the edges, and that's everything from the soft nudging of Mamdani tweeting to turn your thermostat up to 78. It's also building and construction codes that prioritize and preference what are considered high efficiency forms of insulation and heating and cooling systems, or to deter the installation of air conditioners, which is currently the situation that we're seeing over in Europe. They've actually gone much further than the United States in a lot of these types of policies.
Well, talking about Europe, I found something very interesting. The Paris deputy mayor, Audrey Pulvar, she said that the United States, us over here in the U.S., bears a significant amount of responsibility for the extreme heat wave across France. Okay, so to quote, as the second largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions in the world, you bear a significant amount of responsibility for global warming and the consequences we in France are experiencing. Your city is 90% air conditioned are not unrelated to this. In Paris, we take responsibility. And look, I don't know about you, but I know plenty of Americans who wish this were true.
Right.
I wish that basically the dial on my thermostat, every time I turn it down, France gets a little bit warmer. Hell, I might go all the way and just put my AC all the way down to 60. But yeah, what is this butterfly effect? This is a pretty insane butterfly effect.
This is crazy communist lady has opinions on air conditioning is what it basically comes down to. And what she's trying to do is and like the more serious version, she's trying to deflect the predicted consequences of environmental policies that have been adopted throughout the EU and as well as the UK, even though it left the EU, which have made it harder and more onerous and more expensive to install air conditioning. Again, basically because this runs against the goal of net zero, of reducing emissions to zero. Air conditioning it consumes electricity, creates greenhouse gases, so therefore it's bad. It's not that France couldn't install air conditioning. They very obviously could. We have the same technology in the U.S., and it could be quite comfortable over there. But they've made it a market impediment through government regulation to really address what is a predictable weather cycle. And they've done so in I'd argue probably one of the most boneheaded ways possible, because Europe is cold in the winter. They recognize that, but all the building regulations of the past 20 and 30 years have been geared toward heavily insulating the buildings. And this is everything from, you get the double pane windows and doors and thresholds to, they call it passive heating and passive cooling measures. So moving away from HVAC systems and toward what they call natural alternatives that don't consume as much electricity. But one of those things is you pack these buildings heavily with insulation, which is great in the winter because it keeps all the heat in. But you put sun on that, it doesn't mix so well. It just turns like into a natural oven where the building is absorbing sunlight all day. And because the temperature doesn't go down at night, it doesn't radiate out. And by 5 or 6 the next morning when the sun comes up, it's just the whole process repeats itself. And next thing you know, it's 95 or 100 degrees indoors.
The French response on X, and apparently that's a real thing, had this to say, quote, "We're not banning AC. We're making sure future summers need it less." The community note reveals a lot. The community note says that while Europe does not ban AC outright, it is worth noting that French regulations, as you're saying, discourage air conditioning. What an idea. We're not banning AC. We're making sure future summers need it less. I forget. I think it was in the book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, where Alex Epstein, he was quoting someone who was discussing how hot it is in India.
Yeah.
The idea that, if you're not going to advance and have air conditioning in India, say in a perfect world, like you'll stop it from getting, half a degree hotter in however many years. It's like, well, until then, it's still over 100 degrees. So it's probably in your best interest to just get an air conditioner and actually deal with it.
And that's what's going to be disguised here in the French counter argument, is they're pretending all these climate measures actually do anything. Most of them are just window dressing that have an infinitesimally small effects on climate change, even in aggregate, assuming you could even want or desire to change the climate. And yet they have this hubris as, well, we all have to be part of this collective warmth. Quite literally, we have to all do our part, even if it doesn't actually alter or change the purported problem here. We're in it together. Therefore, air conditioning's bad. Therefore, we are morally justified in regulating it, even though it's made everyone miserable. On a predictable basis, every summer there's like a heat wave in Europe. And it's not just discomfort that's coming out of this. There's empirical evidence that, they measure excess death rates that occur that are reflected in seasonal factors like cold spells and heat spells are traditionally the periods when this happens. And it turns out that like over the course of human history, a lot more people, they tend to die of heat exhaustion. It exacerbates strains on the body, especially elderly people. And another thing you find out in Europe, a lot of the hospitals are not even air conditioned.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. So people that are not in the best medical shape, that are like maybe trying to recover from a surgery or something, and suddenly a heat wave hits and it's 95 degrees in your hospital room, that's not a good recipe for recovery. And yet that's kind of the norm that's been emerging over there. And we're starting to see evidence in the data that excess deaths are spiking precisely because of the heat wave that hit Europe over the last couple of weeks. And add on to that, there are all sorts of other economic repercussions. So I just got back from a week in the UK that coincided with this major heat wave that was all over the news. And I'm looking at the temperature outside. It was actually the exact same temperatures in the mid-90s in London as it was in Virginia, where I left, where I live. And I had basically moved from 90s in Virginia to 90s in London. So the exact same temperature. But the comfort level was a night and day difference. Here we have air conditioning. You get over there, and the buildings are steaming hot inside to the point of dysfunction. They were shutting down trains on the public transit system because it was too hot in the train cars. And this was causing some things to malfunction. Businesses were closing early because it was just too hot to operate. You go to a restaurant and you're sitting there in sweltering heat trying to enjoy a meal. You go to hotels, 4- and 5-star hotels that are just like heat boxes walking in there. And you start looking at, well, what's the reason for this? Yes, okay, Northern Europe has a traditionally colder climate, so you have less air conditioning in general. But it's actually way, way less air conditioning than even somewhere like Maine in the United States, where, that's on the colder end of our continent and is not traditionally an air conditioning central hub, but you can at least find it there. And I start asking questions about, so what's going on here? And it turns out there's a policy explanation behind it. Just like in France and in England, they adopted very aggressive climate change control policies over the past 20 years. They refer to it as net zero. The idea is you want to reduce emissions to zero on net, and therefore supposedly reverse climate change. And a big part of it was, well, they changed building codes and installation regulations for putting in heating and air conditioning systems and all sorts of regulatory obstacles. They don't ban it outright, but what they do is they create a barrier to being able to install air conditioning by all the hoops and codes and nonsense you have to jump through. Whereas you could drive to Home Depot in the United States and buy a portable window unit air conditioning system for about $100 and install it that afternoon. You can't do that in the UK. You have to go through all these different hoops of regulatory obstacles. Maybe your local town council has veto power over your ability to install an air conditioning. If it alters that net zero equation, it means you're now an energy consumer. And then one of the other factors I saw in this, and I confirmed this directly, like staying at these hotels, 4- and 5-star hotels in London and around the UK, that 10 or 15 years ago were air conditioned.
No way.
And I say were air conditioned being the key thing. But they had older air conditioning units that ran on Freon, which was the original stuff, and that depleted the ozone layer. So they replaced Freon with these other chemicals that were like Freon replacement. But that fixed the ozone layer problem. But those other chemicals are carbon based, or they have they're seen as greenhouse gases. So those two were phased out in 2015 by a regulation in the UK that said you can no longer use these types of coolants. You have to convert to the more energy efficient one that now fits the new requirements. Well, what this means is all these old air conditioning units couldn't be updated. They couldn't be recharged. So all the economic incentives are in place to discourage hotels from staying modern, and they've actually slid backwards. So whereas in 2010, 2015, you would have had air conditioning in this hotel, here we are in 2026, and it's 95 degrees inside the same building, and the Old system's still there. You flip it on and it blows hot air.
That is so insane because it's kind of like you've had the cure all along. You were using the cure freely.
Yes, yeah.
I don't know. It's almost like anti-science.
Right.
When I look at the new tech and stuff like that, I'm like, oh, human beings are really good at adapting and inventing and innovating. And I think no matter how warm it is or how warm it's going to get, we will find a way to keep my office cool.
Right.
It just seems so backwards to be fighting that for.
Yeah, it's Luddism merged with an anti-capitalist political agenda at the core of it. I mean, let's accept, okay, maybe climate change. So climate change is happening. The world is getting warmer. And yes, there are a mixed bag of effects that come out of that. Some of them are bad. It may mean more extreme weather cycles. It may mean more hurricanes or more heat waves and certain events like that. But the question is, what do you do about it? If we have the technology to mitigate it, that in itself is a solution, but they don't want that solution. And we've seen people making this argument in the last couple of weeks around the European heat wave. They're saying, well, if we install air conditioning, then people won't take climate change seriously enough. Therefore, we must make them suffer so they know that this is something they have to take seriously. It's kind of like we're self-inflicting punishment on people, making their lives harder and more miserable, up to and including increasing those excess deaths that I mentioned that come about from heat exhaustion. All to kind of stick it to them and say, hey, well, you need to take climate change more seriously. And it's kind of like, well, taking climate change seriously is I'm installing an air conditioner. That's me taking climate change seriously. Upgrading the infrastructure system against flooding from hurricanes. That's me taking climate change seriously. Sitting here doing this frivolous window dressing to try to change the climate itself in the other direction. There's nothing serious about that at all. It's a bunch of political symbolism. But what it does do is it allows government to exercise greater control over the economy. It allows regulators to step in and say, no, you aren't allowed to build this building because it's not compliant with this arbitrary code of environmental practices that we have imposed on you. No, you are not allowed to upgrade your air conditioner because the old system used Freon or it used a Freon replacement that we deem contributing to global warming. No, you are not allowed to alter the heating system in your home because it's not net zero. If you do so, you're consuming more energy now. That is all a series of mechanisms for economic and political control in the name of that we're in this together and we're supposed to be saving the planet.
That kind of reminds me of just the idea of like arsonists starting fires to raise awareness about climate change's impact on forest fires.
Yes. Yeah.
Sit there, suffer, sweat, and don't complain about it, because if you complain about it, you're a bad person. But, like we've been talking about, mentioning these excess deaths due to heat. I mean, that's a big thing. And I wonder if are most of the deaths kind of elderly people? Do Europeans have a different relationship to, mass deaths of elderly, where it's sort of like they're off the dole, they've moved on to the, to the next, hopefully air-conditioned paradise? I just find it really wild to be facing death every year and saying we're going to put up with that.
Well, yeah, and they almost don't want to talk about it, even though the data are there, the statistics are there. And that's the other interesting thing. There's a hypocrisy element to it. Because remember, we just went through COVID 6 years ago. And what was the line there is first you have to trust the science. And the science says if it saves even one life, we must all go into lockdown forever. And if you even question that on civil liberties grounds, on economic grounds, on moral grounds, that meant you wanted to kill grandma. And yet the very same people that were using and deploying those types of arguments, you raised the question of heat exhaustion and the lack of air conditioning. Europe was lockdown haven for the better part of a year during COVID. And yet you raise the same question about air conditioning. So you point out, wait a minute, this is also killing grandma. This is also straining people that are on have comorbidities or in poor health. It's also very bad to have a hospital that's not properly air conditioned. You point that out to them, and it's like, well, we can't talk about that because we're actually in it for the greater goal of saving the climate. And I think what this points to is a lot of these policies originate from a political objective, and then they rationalize backward to a moral cause like saving the climate from it. And it's really the political objective that's the cart that's driving the horse here. They want you to think that, hey, net zero is the scientifically advised thing that we must do to control climate change. The reality is net zero is the political end they want for regulatory purposes and government control, and climate change is just the pretext among many other pretexts to get there.
Yeah, I was going to ask, why the lack of air conditioning seems like such a badge of honor for Europeans. And it does seem like, well, if your goal is, as you describe it, then not having an air conditioner is sort of kind of like wearing the uniform. You are a soldier in the fight to get to that point.
Yeah, there's a valorization of misery that's occurring here. And I saw this firsthand. Being over there in the middle of the heat wave, it was the only thing that people were talking about. How horrible it was outside, how miserable everything was. It's 95 degrees outside, 95 degrees inside the building because it's this giant heat trap with no air conditioning. And the next several nights are going to be miserable because I can't get any sleep because the temperature doesn't go down. And I'm sitting here like, why are you living this way when you could do something about it very easily and very cost effectively, but for the existence of these regulations that are in place?
Oh, man. When you describe that, I was just imagining the last time my air conditioner didn't reach my bedroom. And afterwards, I was so upset. I beat it. I just took a baseball bat to it. But that feeling of complete discomfort of just being sweaty and blankets and pillows sticking to you, and if you have a partner, you don't even want them near you.
You mix that with the let's just say the Europeans are also not known for deodorant.
Oh, Phil, don't go there. You're going to get you're going to get in trouble for that.
Yeah.
They're doing it for net zero.
Exactly. Different social conventions. But just think of that crammed into the London Underground in the tube with no air conditioning, and it's 95 degrees outside. It's like the most miserable place on earth in a packed train car, no air conditioning, and a bunch of smelly people around you.
And how are you supposed to be productive with that? So I'm wondering, can we measure kind of like the economic impact of air conditioning? Are air-conditioned businesses or societies more successful?
Yeah, we already you see the anecdotal evidence of that all around. There were stores and restaurants closing early because they said it's just too hot inside. So we sent our employees home. There are tourist locations that suspended operations because of a heat wave. And again, this is not 115 degree heat in Arizona heat wave. This is 85 to 95 degrees. It's normal East Coast United States in the summer that we deal with in air conditioning. They have no air conditioning, and therefore like half of society is shut down and suspended. That has economic consequences in addition to all the other discomforts and problems associated with it.
Yeah, how much does BO reduce productivity? If there's ever been a boss who's just like, look, guys, I got to send you all home because you all stink.
It's an added discomfort.
Well, I'll tell you, I just came back from Las Vegas, Freedom Fest 2026, and I cannot imagine what life would have been like for those 6 or 7 days that I was there if air conditioning did not exist. And I mean, it would basically be like the EU's standpoint that no, Las Vegas should not exist. Like there's no reason, or it should be underground.
Right. It's like this weird dystopian future. Yeah, here's a city that exists primarily because of air conditioning. It was a desert before air conditioning came along. You sit here and think about this. What's all the economic activity that's been generated out of Las Vegas? The fact that it's now this tourist destination, precisely because it's facilitated with technology that allows us to improve upon the natural climate, which is 110 degrees and sweltering.
Considering that we're going to be wrapping up the World Cup and all of the tourists that have come to the United States, I wonder, are they going to bring back air conditioning to their homelands? Like, did they get a jar of cool air from the United States that they're going to try to get through TSA?
I may be worried about the European side. They get accused of trafficking carbon dioxide or emissions that are bad for global warming or something.
Phil, thank you so much for a cool episode. I plan to bump my AC even lower in celebration of this amazing technology that we are so fortunate to have. And we are so fortunate to have you listening to us at Happy Hour Econ. Come back next week. We'll be right here. See you then.